Hello and welcome to Marketing Speak. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, and today we have Marji Ross with us. Marji is a seasoned, successful leader in the publishing industry. For 2 decades, she served as president and publisher of Regnery Publishing, the nation's leading publisher of conservative books. In 2020, Marji founded Marji Ross Consulting, dedicated to helping authors and organizations communicate more effectively and reach larger audiences. Marji, it's so great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Stephan. I'm so glad to be here. Nice to see you.
Yeah, so we met on a mastermind call where
We did.
Tony Robbins Platinum partners were on the call, and you were the guest speaker, and you did a fabulous job. I was just really impressed with all the wisdom that you dropped in that session, and I wanted you to share some of those bits of wisdom with my audience. Before we get into all of that, though, I would love for you to give a little background for our listener, because your bio, it doesn't say enough about the wealth and breadth of experience that you have as a publisher. On the other side of the author table, there's the publisher who is trying to get the best deal for their company and maximize their revenue. And sometimes that's at odds with the author. Having spent 20 years in that role, I'd love for you to share a little bit about what you've learned from that experience.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, the author-publisher relationship sometimes can become very challenging. And that's oftentimes I find when the author and the publisher have different expectations for the same project. In my 20 years at Regnery, we had an acquisitions committee meeting every single month. So whatever that math is, that's 120, 240 acquisition committee meetings at which we were looking at, dozens of proposals each time. So I've looked at thousands of proposals. I've talked to thousands of authors. And to me, the thing I was always looking for was an author who was a crusader, right? Somebody who was so passionate about what they had to say that they would break down walls in order to make sure their message was heard. And then we would obviously be asking the questions, okay, so who's the target market for this book? Who's interested, and why are they interested, and why now, and why this particular author? There are a lot of hurdles an author has to jump over to convince a publisher that that publisher should take a chance on them, because you're always kind of placing a bet when you're a publisher and you acquire a book. You're placing a bet that there's going to be a ready, eager market for this message, this author at this time, and that's it's always a gamble.
Yeah.
But
that reminds me of something that Dean Jackson explained, that he asked the question of his audience, what do you think makes for the best burger joint? Is it the best burger recipe? Is it the best systems, the best staff, the best location, etc.?
Right.
What do you think the best, or what do you think is the most impactful?
Did a long line.
Yeah, exactly. A hungry audience, a hungry
there we go.
clientele. That's what makes for the best burger joint.
So true.
Yeah.
That's
and if
true.
if there's no hungry audience, they're waiting for your book.
Exactly.
Everybody loses. The author loses.
Right.
The publisher loses. Yeah.
Yeah. Something you and I were talking about a little bit before we went on the air was this question of how do you do direct marketing when you're a book publisher? And that was something that Regnery and I really prided ourselves on, that was something we were good at. And direct marketing, as you well know, starts with who's the customer, who's it for? And, if you can answer who's this for and why do they care, you are very far along in convincing a publisher to publish you and in having a successful book. I always felt bad when an author would come with a terrific book, a beautifully written book, and I would have to say, you know what, this is really nicely done, but there's just not a big enough market for it. At least I don't perceive that there's a big enough market for it to, to be able to justify the time and investment and money that it takes to bring a book to market. And you asked about my background. I think one of the reasons that Regnery was able to have it sort of a direct marketing mindset was because a lot of the people at Regnery came from not the book publishing world. And that was kind of a strategic advantage, a competitive advantage for us. I came from 15 years in the publishing world, but in the newsletter publishing world, which is driven by direct marketing. A lot of other people in the company came from the world of politics or the world of media, meaning TV and radio, but not books. Because in a lot of ways, book publishers have been doing what they've been doing the same way for centuries. And it's one thing to fall in love with the writing and the story, but I always tell my authors, you have to fall in love with your readers. That's what you need to do.
Yeah, so good, so true, and so insightful. And you said that the publishing world is changing, and the way that books are hitting the market is changing. I would predict that much of the publishing industry is going to go out of business because they can't adapt.
There's a huge sea change happening in book publishing and book selling, right? So obviously, over the past year, the pandemic and the resulting shutdown of everything has had a huge impact on book retail. And basically, it's shifted buying, to online. Amazon was already killing it in the book world, but the pandemic was the final nail in the coffin, the final straw that broke the camel's back, to make the default way that people buy books be online, whether it's Amazon or BarnesandNoble.com or Walmart or Costco, what have you. And once people started, shopping online exclusively, they realized they could get a lot more done. So I don't think that it's going to go back. Obviously, there are reasons that people like bookstores, but it's almost a boutique experience, I think, rather than a mass market experience now. And so I think the challenge for publishers is that there's so much less opportunity for discovery, right? I wrote a blog last year called The Death of Browsing. And because it's really a very different experience when you're shopping for books or anything, but particularly books online. It's much harder to discover something you didn't already know existed or weren't already looking for. And there's a big difference between browsing and searching, right? Yeah. So to me, when book buying becomes about searching rather than browsing, there's a whole different challenge in front of publishers as to how to get your folks to search for what you want them to search for and how to get their search to lead to you. And that's, I think, the big challenge for publishers. I think the publishers that are smart about navigating that will not only survive, but become even more successful. And the publishers that aren't able to adapt, I think they're gone.
Yeah. So where do you think Amazon's heading in all of this? And how do we get back some of the magic that we lost as consumers and browsing the aisles of Barnes and Noble and finding really cool books that we wouldn't have normally found, and artists I remember finding some great music uh, just listening. Do you remember when those days when you'd put
Well,
those headsets on
can you
and
find a record store? I mean, remember Tower Records, and all
yeah,
those places are gone too. So yeah, it's a great question and a little bit of a scary analogy, right? To think about what happened with the music business. I think the good news for books is obviously it's still a visual medium as opposed to an auditory medium, and so there's still something different about seeing and touching a book and holding a book. But I think there's a huge opportunity and challenge in front of Barnes and Noble. And as you may know, they have new ownership as of a couple of years ago, and the folks they're now run by the people who ran or are running Waterstone's books chain in the UK, and that book chain very famously kind of overhauled the way they were managing their business, and the fellow in charge of that said he was going to do the same thing at Barnes and Noble. And then the pandemic struck, and kind of all bets were off. But I think to me, the opportunity for any bookstore is to lean into that, the experience that book lovers have, right? I think the most successful bookstores are not going to be the bookstores with the biggest supply. There's no way they can compete with Amazon on that. So don't try to compete with somebody that you know you're going to lose at. Play a different game. And so I think the retailers should, as much as they can, be curating an experience for their audience. And there are some really terrific independent bookstores throughout the country that do a good job of that. And their customers love them, and they go there because they enjoy the experience of going to the store. And they know that they're going to discover something new, whether it's just browsing the aisles or it's somebody that works there that can recommend something. The people who work there are actually knowledgeable book people, and they know how to recommend things. I think to me, that's the future of bricks and mortar retail. And that means that I think those stores are both smaller and more distinctive. They're curated to their community. And so, it's the opposite of You've Got Mail. It's going in the other direction, where suddenly those stores that really did cater to their customers and understand how to replicate an experience for readers that they love, those are the ones I think that will survive and thrive. And I would love to see that happening, popping up all over the country. And there has been a little bit of a recovery in the independent bookstore market.
Yeah, I'd like to see a lot more of that. But, it's funny when you said the reference to You've Got Mail. I was just thinking there's some listeners, I'm sure, that don't get that reference because they're not that old. You're right. like us.
Go watch the movie.
Yeah, right. Many people don't even know what an AOL CD is like. Like, what is that experience of getting one in the mail?
That's right. That's right. One of the funny things is when you think about how ubiquitous online shopping and the online experience has become, it's easy to think of, when you're a book person, it's easy to think of Amazon as, a book retailer. Amazon is everything retailer. And while they don't release statistics that will exactly tell you this, best estimates these days are that books represent about 7% of their revenue. So Amazon, which is the number one book retailer in America, 93% of what they do is not books. So that
That's pretty
I think is
mind-blowing.
it is mind-blowing. It's also revealing because I think it explains why a lot of what Amazon does is not designed specifically to be beneficial to a reader or a book buyer. It's all about, it is customer facing, obviously. They have the whole be obsessed with your customer, but it's more about, optimizing the search results and sort of showing you what you already have told them you want. And again, that's why it's very hard to discover something new.
Yeah, it's like a filter bubble.
Yeah, it is. Emphasis on bubble.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's a great example of a challenge that authors face to have
Right,
the potential reader break out of that filter bubble in order to
right,
discover the author and their books.
right.
What are some of the other challenges that these authors face in this strange world that we live in these days?
Yeah, there are a few big ones. I mean, on a related front, it is harder and harder to get a traditional publisher to pick up a first-time author because of this challenge in browsing, this lack of browsing, this lack of discovery. It's so much riskier for a publisher to try to market a book by an author that you haven't heard of. And so there's this giant bifurcation where you've got all the chips on the table are placed on celebrity authors, franchise authors, and proven, authors with name recognition or celebrities with name recognition who then become authors. And then, there's that on one side, and then there's nothing in the middle. And then at the very other end of the spectrum, you've got, millions literally of self-published books published by authors who can't get a deal with a traditional publisher. And so, so there's a challenge just getting a publishing deal. And then there's a challenge getting visibility, sort of breaking through the competition with the other folks that are sort of vying for the same mind space, same market share. But there are two interesting things, I think, that are maybe reassuring to authors, especially authors who aren't, famous already. One is that it's still true that the single biggest reason anyone buys a book is because somebody they know or trust recommended it. It's word of mouth. And publishers forever have sat around rooms and said, so how do we do word of mouth? How do we do that? How do we make that happen, right? Malcolm Gladwell has written many books on this, but how do you get to the tipping point? How do you make people start recommending your book? And so there are, in some ways, it's just all about guerrilla marketing. It's all about social media. It's about really assigning yourself as an author the job of being, a missionary for your message. And it is something that can snowball or go viral. One can lead to two, can lead to four, can lead to eight, can lead to 16, and you start the multiplier effect of word of mouth. But my advice to authors is always start with a very, very, very focused target market. Start with the absolute bullseye of your target market. So you're talking to the people who already love you, already know you, already are cheering for you, rooting for you, and then, move out from there. So get those people mobilized, get those people talking about your book, get those people recommending it to their friends and posting it and reposting your posts. And I think that's possible. The other thing that's interesting is and this is very related, the most influential part of an Amazon book page is the customer reviews. That's what people read. That's what drives, Amazon has measured this. That's the single biggest driver of whether or not somebody buys something and how they choose something. So even if you're self-published, doesn't matter. As long as your book is on Amazon, focus on those reviews. Get lots of reviews, get good reviews, get people to post reviews. And then I had some real smart marketers say that one of the things they do is they read through the reviews on Amazon of their book and use the emotional language in those reviews in their marketing copy. So, study what the people who already like you are saying and use that to talk to new people.
You can even use what people are saying in the reviews of competitors' books.
You can.
Right? So even before your book is out, you could say,
right.
well, what are the top 3 sellers or 4 or whatever in my category, in my niche, that are doing great, and what are the people saying about them, good and bad? What language can I incorporate to either reinforce the positive or to differentiate me from the negative aspects of the books that are being torn apart?
That's a really smart tip. It really is, and it's very similar to one of the best pieces of advice I ever heard about how to get a book deal in the first place. Very similar, right? You got to know who your competition is. You've got to know who are the most successful players in your space, and then use that as a stepping stone to get a deal, whether you're trying to get an agent or you're trying to get the attention of a publisher. Go to the publisher and say, I know you published X. My book would appeal to that very same market, but it's a little different because Y, or it also goes into the blah, or it helps people in another way because, or it answers the question that people have when they read that book, which is X. And so, standing on the shoulders of the people who are already successful in your space is a really good idea.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Now, one thing that struck me when you were talking about the situation that authors face when they're trying to negotiate with a publisher, seems like the publisher is basically saying, maybe beating around the bush with it, or they're just outright coming out with this, tell me what your platform is. What's your platform? Because if you don't have one, we're not interested, which means that the publisher isn't doing much of anything. They're relying on you to do all the marketing, what the heck is that all about?
That's absolutely true. When I was at Regnery, we would hear time and time again from authors who came from big New York publishing houses and had experience there. And these sometimes were even celebrity or well-known authors or thought leaders. And they would say, they would be flabbergasted that the publisher would, publish the book and then turn to the author and say, okay, well, go get some interviews or go book yourself or use your contacts in your platform to promote the book. You're on. And again, I think that was one of the great advantages that Regnery had. We really were very, very hands-on and very intentional about publicity and earned media for our authors, understanding that, it's not enough to publish the book. You got to let people know it exists, and you've got to get people excited about it. And you've got to get the media excited about it, because when you're pitching the media, they're your target market, right? Whether you're an author or a publisher, you have to remember, when you're pitching the media, you have to give them something that makes them look good and gives them a competitive advantage. So many authors, whether they're traditionally published or not, are in the situation where they're responsible for their own marketing and leveraging their platform. And it's certainly true that it's one of the most popular questions publishers ask is, what's your platform? Describe your platform. And it is important to have a platform. And that's, an assignment for every aspiring author is to develop their platform, whether it's a podcast or a blog or a Facebook group or or a big following on Instagram, whatever it is. It comes back to connecting with your target market, knowing who they are, finding them, and talking to them in a way that's interesting. But if you've demonstrated that people think you're interesting, that's really one of the key things that publishers are looking for, right? Have you already proven that there's a group of people out there who are interested in what you have to say?
Yeah. Well, I remember reading the article years and years ago from Kevin Kelly called 1,000 True Fans. You don't have to have a huge audience. Your tribe can be just 1,000 people. They just need to be so passionate and rabidly interested in what you're up to that they will pitch people on your behalf.
They become your ambassadors. They become your crusaders and your missionaries for your message. That's so true. And I have told many authors the same thing about media outlets. There are authors who will say, well, I only want to do a nationally televised show or a nationally syndicated radio show. And I can tell you absolutely that I've had authors on the Today Show who sold fewer copies of their book from the Today Show appearance than from a regional radio talk show, because the Today Show wasn't their target market necessarily, and the Today Show interview was 5 minutes, and the Today Show host wasn't into the book. They were nice. It was a nice interview. It was interesting, but they weren't advocates for the book. And the people watching weren't that engaged, right? Whereas you get a regional or a local radio show or podcast that has a really passionate, dedicated fan base audience and a really engaged host, that can be way more powerful in terms of promoting your book through an interview than just, sheer eyeballs and sheer numbers. So, yeah, in all things, it comes down to commitment and quality rather than just sheer numbers.
Yeah. Rabid, excitement.
Find your rabid fans.
Yeah. It reminds me that Neil Strauss called these people his street team, and he would ask them to phone the local bookstores and ask if Neil's new book is on the shelves yet.
Oh, I love that.
Right?
That's great.
And they'd have to look it up in the system and no, we don't have it yet.
That's another example of how surprising it can be that a small number can be really effective, right? I remember I worked for this big newsletter company, and we had a big customer service department, and they came in one day and they said, we're getting a lot of calls of people who are upset with this marketing piece. And we stopped and said, well, how many is a lot? And it was 12. Okay, they had never gotten 12 calls about one marketing piece before. But we had sent out 3 million direct mail pieces, right? So 12 is just not a lot, but it seemed like a lot to them. And so, if you're a bookstore manager, how many times do you actually get a phone call with somebody asking you to look up a particular book? It just doesn't happen that often. So you get 3 in a week about the same book. This is a sure bestseller. Now you're on it, right? This is Michelle Obama's Becoming. This is going to be huge. It's a good reminder that a few engaged and passionate people can make a big difference.
Yes, yeah. Now, what happens if you have a platform, but it's in a different market from a market you want to enter? I'll give you an example. I am an SEO expert with The Art of SEO is one of my books. I also have Google Power Search, and then in the social media space is social e-commerce.
Right.
That's a far cry from the book I'm working on now,
Which
which is
is,
a self-help book about how we are living in a friendly universe.
yeah,
And that audience for that book is a bit different from the SEO geeks
right.
and the marketing managers and the business owners who I'm
Yep.
reaching now. So,
Well,
what are your thoughts on
okay. So I have,
establishing that
that
new
is a
platform
great
or,
question.
yeah,
Yeah, that's a great question, and a lot of people face that. Um, I think the first thing I would say is look, start by looking for any overlap in your Venn diagram. Seriously. You already have a very well established market and, group of people who have read your work, have listened to your podcast, like listening to you and hearing from you. Within that audience, there will be a subset of people who are interested in this as well. And I would start with them.
hmm,
And I would be very candid with your current audience. I would share with them that you are, you know, working on this area, this new topic,
I
and I
guess I
would tell
just
them,
did, didn't I?
yeah, you did. That's right. And tell them why. So I think so. Right. So one, talk to the people you already got and find that overlap in your Venn diagram. There will be some people there who are also interested in this, right? Second thing I think that's really important is I'm a huge advocate of brand integrity. So I need an answer to why you're doing that, right? How does it make sense in my brain that the guy who did Google Power Search and the art of SEO is now doing this book on this self-help book? Why? What's the connection? What answers, what makes it make sense to me, right? And I'm positive you can you can answer that question, how you got from one to the other and how what you've done previously informs or led to what you're doing now. So to me, that preserves your brand integrity so that somebody says, oh, yeah, I understand why the guy who did the art of SEO is now talking about this. That makes sense to me. And that's pretty interesting because he'll have an interesting perspective based on XYZ. So those are things I think are two most important. Look for the overlap in your Venn diagram and think about your brand integrity. How does it make sense that you, the expert in A, are now turning to talk about topic B?
Yeah. And it's still an asset that I have this platform. It's better than having no
Oh, yeah,
platform, even though it's not
absolutely.
highly relevant to the self-help category.
Right. Well, I mean, in a lot of ways, there's a lot of self-help in what you do. You're empowering people. You're telling people how to sort of, take advantage of the tools at their disposal. That's a similar mindset. The kind of person who's going to be drawn to your advice is also the kind of person who is probably um, uh, susceptible to a pitch on self-improvement. And I think the other thing about a platform is, especially for a publisher or a media personality, it also demonstrates that you know how to connect with people, right? Subject agnostic, it still says you are not afraid to put yourself out there. And the truth is there are a lot of authors who love to write, love to dive into a subject, but don't really love to talk to people. So just having developed a platform, and it's a good, robust platform, you're already separating yourself from all of those authors, which is an advantage right there.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Very good. So were
Yeah.
there other challenges that authors face that you wanted to bring to the forefront in this
Yeah,
conversation?
well, I think the other biggest challenge really is, in today's kind of news cycle and information overload, how does an author get media, get visibility? Most authors are told, we're going to do a 2-week, whatever, media tour or book tour or publicity launch. Or they're told you need to do a book launch. But most authors have no idea how to do that. And the fact is, most media outlets are talking about whatever the headline is today, or maybe this hour. So authors, I think, have to develop the ability to find the news hook for their book, no matter what their book is, no matter when it came out. You've got to be able to answer why today should a producer or a host or an editor want to be talking about my book? And that's a skill set that a lot of authors don't necessarily have. I personally think it's very easy to develop, but you got to be aware that, when you're pitching the media, they've got to be relevant to their listeners and their readers today. And, you might have a great story, a great message, a great insight, but you got to relate it to something that happened today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's got to rise above all the noise, all the cacophony, right? And it's got to be super relevant. And this relates to something that you share in your lead magnet on your site, the 5 secrets to getting a
bestseller.
Getting a bestseller. That's right. And that's the secret number 3. Understand clearly what problem you're solving. And I love the examples that you gave. It's not solving the problem that's the obvious generic one, but the one that's very specific, and it pushes on a nerve. Like, for example, you gave, I'm trapped in a dead-end job and I need help finding a job I love without losing my financial security. I love that.
There you go.
So can you share a few other examples of great crystal clear problem statements?
That is a good one. Okay, so if you have been married for 30 years and find that now that your kids are grown and your husband's retired, you have nothing left to talk about with your spouse, how do you rekindle the romance in your marriage? And is it even possible to do that?
Well, that's a good one. Do you have a book that answers that one?
Yeah, I was working with an author who has a great book on that topic. It's called Dancing in the Kitchen. So she has some really good advice on how to nurture a long-term relationship. Nice. I was working with another author who has another really interesting book. So the problem she solves is for high-performing women. So you've got professional women, high-performing women who are in high-stress jobs and have families and kids and homes and careers and staff and bottom line responsibility. And the problem is, how do you nurture all the different relationships in your life and still keep up with all the responsibilities you have with all the different jobs you're juggling? And so that's, I love that her articulation, because it very specifically identifies who's it for, and then it gives a sort of emotionally rich description of the problem they have. And as I was saying, one of the mistakes is to try to solve a problem that people don't know they have. You can't say, the the worst way of offering to solve a problem is to say, do you suffer from X? And the person says, no. Well, then nothing you have to say after that matters. So you have to be sure that that the problem that you're talking about, the person knows they have. It doesn't mean they have to know the solution. It doesn't even mean that they have to know the cause, right? And that's where sometimes people get tripped up. They focus on the cause of the problem instead of the problem. So when you talk about a problem that people have, you think about what they're feeling, right? Talk about it in feeling words, in a language. Do you have difficulty? Are you frustrated? Are you worried? Are you nervous? Are you anxious? Are you confused? Are you impatient? Those are the best, I think, ways to start a problem proposition, right? Because if you're going to connect with the right people, it's like, yeah, that's exactly how I feel. I do feel frustrated. I do feel worried. I do feel anxious. I do feel confused. And then your solution can be both. Then you can come in and explain why you think that person. Did you know that it's because, in a pandemic, more people feel frustrated than whatever, you can reveal to them the reason. So they don't have to know the reason, they have to know the feeling. They have to connect with the feeling. And then, of course, you offer a solution.
Yeah.
And then you've got them hooked.
Yeah, and I love how the reason could be something that gives them some insight into themselves that they didn't have. So they become very tuned in to you and hearing what you have to say, because it gives them more insight about themselves, and they're expecting to get more of that.
That's right. They feel like they're halfway to solving the problem already just by understanding the cause. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a related corollary to this, and that is trying to be everything to everybody makes you relevant to no one.
Correct. That's another one of my cardinal rules. When I have an author come in and I always say, who's the book for? And they say, everyone. I'm like, no, wrong answer. No. A book, when you say everyone, it often means you have no idea who it's for. No book is for everyone. And the more clear an author is as to who that book is for, the better chance they have of success.
Yeah. I for this book that I'm working on, I thought of a subtitle that I think would either connect with a very specific audience and kind of turn off the others outside of that audience. And then there's one that would be more inclusive, kind of violating your cardinal rule. I'm curious what your thoughts are on each of these. Okay, so Living in a Friendly Universe, a skeptic's guide to the unseen world.
Okay.
So that's option one. That's polarizing to the skeptic, and then the non-skeptic, the believer, is like, yeah, I'm not a skeptic, so that's not for me. And then the version that's more inclusive, Living in a Friendly Universe, a guide to the unseen world for both skeptic and believer.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Who will benefit the most from the book, do you think?
Everybody.
Want to try that
Anyone
again?
with a soul, which would be everybody, even if they don't feel like they have one.
Right.
Yeah. I just want people to elevate their consciousness. I want them to feel more connected to the fabric of creation, and that it's not all doom and gloom. There's actually a purpose to what's happening in their world and more generally on the planet. Right.
Well, my marketer's brain, of course, says the first one, the skeptic's guide, because what you really want is somebody who looks at your book, sees here's your proposition, and then raises their hand. That's me. That's exactly me. You've described me to a T. And so if there's a way for you to describe exactly who that reader is that you want somebody to raise their hand and said, that's me. I need that. I want that. Um, then you've really nailed it. It doesn't mean it can't be a large group. Nothing wrong with being a large target market. It's just got to be something clear enough so that somebody, when they encounter your proposition, say, that's me. He's talking to me.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that maybe will help them to dial into me as a potential source for inspiration in this regard would be,
Yep.
I'm a former skeptic.
Yep.
A scientist, a student of science, somebody who was studying for PhD, who dropped out to start an internet marketing firm. And I was a diehard skeptic. I was agnostic until I had my spiritual awakening. So I'm maybe a better source for information for that person who relates to the skeptic in me, the former skeptic, than somebody very woo-woo like Marianne Williamson.
Yeah, that's right. No, I think your positioning is great. And is it, from one skeptic to another? Is it from a former skeptic? Maybe it is a former skeptic shares something, so that they are intrigued by the idea that you walked a journey that they would like to walk or are interested in walking.
Yeah. There's no need for a near-death experience in order to get there.
Right. That's your reading line. Without coming back to life from the dead.
Yeah. All right. Well, I know we're getting up to time here. You have this great resource on how to unleash the power of your book for folks who are already working on or already have a book and they just don't have the results that they were hoping for. So could you give a little more about that and where folks
thank you.
Go?
Yeah, I have launched earlier this year with a longtime friend and business partner who also has over 30 years in the book publishing business. We try not to sound old, so we don't necessarily want to say 60 years in book publishing, but combined, that's what we've got. And we've launched a program for authors who have already published their book and were, for whatever reason, frustrated or disappointed with the results. And honestly, that's obviously more often true than not, unfortunately. We've each worked with, as I said, thousands of authors, and it's tough to have a successful book launch. And it's tough to sustain that success, and it's tough to have that success translate into other aspects of your life, whether it's, building your platform, building your speaking career, leading to coaching or training, or repurposing your content into courses and workshops and things like that, all of which is a way to leverage your book. So we've launched something called Unleash the Power of Your Book, and folks can check it out at unleashthepowerofyourbook.com or at my website, which is just marjirossconsulting.com. And we're rolling out the program. We had a pilot program at the beginning of the year, and it went great. So we're rolling out the program starting June 1st. So we're starting to accept applications now. We're limiting it to 10 authors only, because we really want this to be very high touch, very personalized program where we take 10 authors through 7 weeks, at the end of which time they will really start to unlock the potential of their book and turn what was maybe a disappointing exercise into something that's really successful and really rewarding.
That's awesome. So thank you so much, Marji. This was so insightful and thought-provoking and inspiring for folks who are listening all the way to the end here. I think they either have a book in them or they already have a book out of them.
Right.
So they're a good fit for you, and
That's
you're the real
great.
deal. So I hope they do connect with you,
Thank you.
and you do have some fabulous resources there. So thank you for being so generous and sharing stuff with folks who aren't clients.
It's truly my pleasure. I really like doing it, and it was a lot of fun. So thank you very much for having me.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, listener, for listening. Now get out there and do something with this. It's not enough to just listen passively and think, wow, this was good stuff. Take something that you learned and apply it in your life, in your business this week, and we'll catch you in next week's episode.